The nursing home had always been a serene place, a haven where the elderly could spend their twilight years in peace and comfort. Alex, a young volunteer with a kind heart and a genuine interest in the well-being of the residents, had been working there for a few months now. He enjoyed working at the home and found fulfillment in listening to the residents' stories and helping them with daily activities. However, a dark current had begun to disturb the tranquility that Alex had come to associate with the place. It began unnoticed. Alex noticed an increase in deaths among the residents of the home. At first, he wrote it off as coincidence and the natural course of life in a nursing home. But as time went on, the frequency of deaths began to increase alarmingly. With each new death, a gnawing feeling gripped him, an inexplicable sense that something was wrong. One rainy afternoon, while Alex was helping to clean up the front desk, he came across a stack of medical files. Curiosity got the best of him, and he started leafing through them. What he found made his blood run cold. All of the residents who had died had similar medical conditions, and, even more disturbingly, all of them had recently taken out pensions or had no close relatives to look after their condition. Each death certificate bore the signature of the same physician, Dr. Morgan. Alex's thoughts raced. Could this be a mere coincidence? He realized that he needed to investigate further. He began to observe the day-to-day operations of the nursing home more closely, especially the activities of the caretaker, Mr. Harris. Mr. Harris was a tall, imposing man with a calm and collected demeanor. He was always around, seemingly appearing out of nowhere whenever any of the residents became ill. His presence, which had once been reassuring, now seemed ominous and intrusive to Alex. Late one night, Alex found himself alone in the common area, reviewing his notes and trying to put a puzzle together. He noticed Mr. Harris slipping into the medroom. Alex's curiosity piqued. He followed him quietly, peering through the small window in the door. Inside, he saw Mr. Harris meticulously preparing syringes, his movements precise and almost ritualistic. The scene sent shivers down Alex's spine. Determined to get to the truth, Alex began to document everything. He kept a secret diary, scrupulously recording dates, times, and any suspicious activity he observed. He even managed to secretly photograph Mr. Harris administering what he suspected were lethal doses of drugs. Each piece of evidence he gathered strengthened his resolve, but it also increased his paranoia. He knew he had to be careful. Any wrong move could alert Mr. Harris and put him in mortal danger. Days turned into weeks, and Alex's anxiety grew. He became hypervigilant, constantly looking over his shoulder and pondering his every action. His once peaceful nights became plagued by insomnia and nightmares with faceless inhabitants begging for help. The weight of his discoveries were weighing on him, and he realized it was only a matter of time before something would happen. One fateful evening, while helping Mrs. Thompson, a sweet elderly woman with a passion for knitting, Alex overheard a conversation that made his blood run cold. Mr. Harris and Dr. Morgan were standing in the hallway, talking in raised tones. Their words were unintelligible, but he heard phrases such as "keep calm" and "ensure the smooth processing of funds." His heart raced in his chest as he realized he was hearing confirmation of his worst fears. He knew he had to act, but he needed more concrete proof. The safety of the residents depended on it. He decided to meet with Mr. Harris, but he had to do it carefully. The next steps would have to be calculated to make sure he had enough evidence to uncover the truth without putting himself at unnecessary risk. The line between good and evil, safety and danger had never been so thin, and Alex realized he was walking down a dangerous path. Taking a deep breath, he prepared himself for the work ahead. The shadows that lurked at the edge of his perception were now fully out in the open, and he was determined to bring them out into the open, no matter what it cost him. Determined to uncover the sinister activities at the nursing home, Alex became even more vigilant, keeping a close eye on Mr. Harris and everyone associated with him. The once tranquil environment now resembled a maze of secrets, with danger lurking behind every door. Alex realized that he had to act carefully, because any wrong step could lead to dire consequences. To begin with, Alex adjusted his schedule. He began to go out more often for shifts and offer help in those cases that allowed him to stay close to Mr. Harris. He watched the caretaker's every move, noting how he showed up at the exact moments when a patient's health was declining dramatically. Mr. Harris always carried a small, worn leather bag from which he pulled syringes, vials, and pills. This seemed suspicious to Alex, because the contents of the bag never dwindled no matter how many times it was used. Late one night, while finishing his rounds, Alex noticed Mr. Harris enter the medical room again. This time, Alex was ready. He positioned himself in a dark corner, holding his cell phone camera at the ready. Through the small window, Alex saw Mr. Harris carefully preparing a syringe of clear liquid. As the caretaker turned to leave, Alex quickly snapped a few pictures, capturing the exact moment the syringe was filled and the look of cold determination on Mr. Harris's face. The next day, Alex reviewed the photos he had taken. Although they were a little grainy due to the dim lighting, they clearly showed Mr. Harris handling the medication. Encouraged by this small victory, Alex decided to dig deeper into the medical records of the guests. He needed to make a stronger connection between the mysterious deaths and Mr. Harris's involvement. For starters, he volunteered to help with the administrative work, a task that many others found tedious. Alex, however, saw it as a golden opportunity. Late into the night, he combed through the files, meticulously recording any irregularities. He discovered that all of the deceased residents had remarkably similar medical histories and had recently updated their retirement plans. What's more, all the death certificates had been signed by Dr. Morgan, something Alex had already guessed, but now it was confirmed. One evening, while working in the archives, Alex overheard a conversation between Mr. Harris and Dr. Morgan in a nearby office. The door was slightly ajar, and their voices, though quiet, came through enough for Alex to make out the conversation. Mr. Harris mentioned the term schedule adjustments, and Dr. Morgan replied, "We have to maintain the appearance of natural causes." Alex's heart raced as he quickly recorded the conversation in his journal. Alex knew he needed hard evidence, not just pictures and notes. He decided to install a hidden camera in the medical room, a move risky but necessary. He purchased a small, discreet camera and carefully mounted it on a high shelf so that it had a good view of the entire room. Every time he went off shift, he discreetly checked the camera and uploaded the footage to his laptop. Over the next few days, Alex's hidden camera captured several instances of Mr. Harris preparing and administering medications late at night. One recording shows Mr. Harris injecting a clear liquid into an IV bag attached to a sleeping patient. The next morning, he is found dead. Alex's blood ran cold in his veins as he reviewed the tapes, realizing he had captured the murder in real time. Armed with these recordings, Alex felt he finally had enough evidence to expose Mr. Harris and Dr. Morgan. However, he realized that he had to act strategically. He needed to make sure the evidence got to the right authorities without giving Mr. Harris and Dr. Morgan any chance to cover their tracks. Alex decided to meet Mr. Harris one last time, hoping to extract from him a confession that would be the final nail in the coffin. As Alex prepared for the confrontation, his paranoia increased. He began to notice that Mr. Harris was watching him more and more closely, and his once friendly colleagues now seemed wary and distant. It seemed to him that he was being watched, that his every move was being scrutinized. The pressure was weighing on him, but he knew he couldn't back down. Too many lives were at stake. Taking a deep breath, Alex prepared himself for a confrontation. He thought through what he would say, how he would present the evidence, and most importantly, how he would ensure his own safety. The shadows were getting longer, and the line between good and evil had never been so blurred. Alex was determined to get to the truth, even if it meant risking everything. The day had finally arrived. Alex had gathered all his evidence, the photographs, the recordings, and his meticulously documented notes. He felt a mix of fear and determination as he prepared to confront Mr. Harris. The atmosphere in the nursing home seemed eerily calm, as if the building itself was holding its breath in anticipation of what was to come. Alex chose the break room for the confrontation. It was usually empty during the late afternoon, providing a private yet neutral setting. He strategically placed his phone, set to record, in his pocket, ensuring the camera lens peeked out just enough to capture the interaction. With everything in place, he waited. Mr. Harris entered the break room, his expression as unreadable as ever. He greeted Alex with a nod, not suspecting anything out of the ordinary. Alex's heart pounded in his chest as he gathered his courage. "Mr. Harris, I need to talk to you about something serious," Alex began, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. Mr. Harris raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued but not yet alarmed. "What is it, Alex?" Taking a deep breath, Alex laid out the photographs on the table. "I've been noticing a disturbing pattern in the deaths of our residents. These photos show you preparing and administering medication. I also have recordings and notes that link these activities to the deaths." For a moment there was silence. Mr. Harris looked at the photographs, his expression slowly hardening. The room seemed to grow colder as the tension thickened. Alex could see the gears turning in Mr. Harris's mind as he processed the situation. "You've been very busy, haven't you?" Mr. Harris finally said, his voice low and dangerous. "You shouldn't have involved yourself in matters you don't understand." Alex stood his ground, his resolve unwavering. "I understand enough to know that you and Dr. Morgan are responsible for these deaths. I'm going to the authorities with this evidence. This has to stop." Mr. Harris's demeanor changed in an instant. The calm facade he always maintained shattered, revealing a menacing intensity. He stepped closer to Alex, his eyes cold and calculating. "You're making a grave mistake, Alex. You have no idea what you're dealing with." Before Alex could react, Mr. Harris lunged forward, grabbing him by the collar. In the struggle, Alex's phone fell out of his pocket, skidding across the floor. Mr. Harris glanced at it, understanding immediately that their conversation had been recorded. His grip tightened, and Alex felt a surge of panic. Desperate to break free, Alex managed to twist out of Mr. Harris's grasp and stumbled towards the door. He bolted out of the break room, racing down the corridor. His mind raced as he tried to think of his next move. He needed to get to the director's office and present his evidence before Mr. Harris could catch him. As Alex sprinted through the halls, he noticed the nursing home seemed eerily empty. The usual bustle of activity was absent, adding to his sense of urgency. He reached the director's office, burst through the door, and slammed it shut behind him. The director, a stern woman in her late 50s, looked up in surprise. "Alex, what on earth is going on?" she demanded. Barely catching his breath, Alex hurriedly explained everything, laying out his evidence on her desk. The director's expression shifted from confusion to shock as she examined the photographs and listened to the audio recording from his phone. This is horrifying," she muttered, her face pale. "We need to call the police immediately." Just as she reached for the phone, the door burst open. Mr. Harris stood in the doorway, flanked by 2 orderlies. His calm facade had returned, but his eyes still held that menacing gleam. "I'm afraid Alex has had a bit of a breakdown," Mr. Harris said smoothly. "He's been under a lot of stress and has started imagining things. It's quite tragic, really." The director looked between Alex and Mr. Harris, confusion and doubt clouding her features. Alex could see her hesitation and knew he had to act fast. "He's lying," Alex shouted. "He's been killing residents and covering it up. You have to believe me." But before the director could respond, the orderlies grabbed Alex, restraining him with practiced efficiency. Alex struggled, but their grip was too strong. "Sedate him," Mr. Harris ordered, his voice devoid of emotion. As the needle pierced his arm, Alex felt a wave of dizziness wash over him. His vision blurred, and the last thing he saw was Mr. Harris's cold, calculating eyes. Darkness closed in, and Alex knew he had failed. Alex awoke to a sterile white ceiling. The familiar hum of hospital machinery surrounded him, and the scent of antiseptic stung his nostrils. He tried to sit up, but his limbs felt heavy, restrained by soft but unyielding straps. Panic surged through him as memories of his confrontation with Mr. Harris flooded back. He turned his head, spotting a nurse adjusting an IV drip beside his bed. "Where am I?" Alex croaked, his voice weak and raspy. The nurse looked at him with a mixture of pity and professionalism. "You're in the hospital, Alex. You had a breakdown at the nursing home. We had to sedate you for your own safety." "No," Alex whispered, shaking his head. "You don't understand. Mr. Harris, he's killing the residents." The nurse's expression softened, but she shook her head. "You need to rest. Everything will be okay." As she left the room, Alex's mind raced. He needed to escape, to warn the authorities before Mr. Harris could continue his deadly practices. Struggling against the restraints, he felt a sharp pain in his wrist where the IV needle was inserted. He gritted his teeth, determined not to give in to the sedation that still fogged his mind. Hours blurred together as Alex fought to stay awake, his thoughts drifting in and out of coherence. He needed a plan, a way to get out and prove the truth. The restraints made it impossible to move freely, but he knew he had to try. Summoning every ounce of strength, he managed to dislodge the IV needle, the sharp pain jolting him back to full consciousness. The next time the nurse came in, Alex feigned sleep, his breathing slow and steady. As she checked his vitals, he waited for the perfect moment. When she turned her back, he used his free hand to fumble with the strap on his other wrist, finally managing to loosen it. With both hands free, he quietly undid the straps around his legs. Just as the nurse turned around, Alex sprang from the bed, surprising her. He dashed out of the room, ignoring her shouts for help. The hospital corridor stretched out before him, a seemingly endless maze of doors and sterile walls. He had no idea where he was going, but he knew he had to get out. As he ran, he heard footsteps and voices behind him. Orderlies were already in pursuit. Desperation fueled his flight, but the sedation still lingering in his system made him sluggish and uncoordinated. He stumbled into a stairwell, taking the steps 2 at a time, hoping to find an exit. Bursting through a door at the bottom, Alex found himself in the basement. Dim, flickering lights cast eerie shadows on the concrete walls. He spotted a service entrance at the far end and made a beeline for it. Just as he reached the door, a pair of strong hands grabbed him from behind. "Where do you think you're going, Alex?" Mr. Harris's voice was cold and mocking. Alex struggled, but Mr. Harris's grip was like iron. "You won't get away with this," Alex spat, his voice filled with defiance. Mr. Harris chuckled, a low, menacing sound. "Oh, but I already have. You see, Alex, everyone believes you're the one who's lost his mind. No one will believe your wild accusations. And now, you're coming back with me." Despite his best efforts, Alex was overpowered. Mr. Harris and the orderlies dragged him back to the hospital, where they strapped him down again. This time they were more thorough, ensuring he had no chance of escape. The nurse reinserted the IV needle, and Alex felt the familiar fog of sedation creeping over him. As he lay there, helpless, Alex realized the full extent of Mr. Harris's manipulation. He had underestimated the caretaker's cunning and the depth of his influence. The truth seemed more elusive than ever, slipping through his fingers like sand. In the days that followed, Alex was kept heavily sedated, his pleas and protests ignored. The staff treated him with a detached kindness, convinced he was suffering from a mental breakdown. Meanwhile, the deaths at the nursing home continued, each one a testament to the dark secret Alex had tried so hard to expose.